Well, welcome to Cultural Markisms. I'm really glad to have my guest with me today, David Ould. I guess we should do really the COVID handshake. So
yes, let's do it.
Welcome. Great to have you with us. David is the Anglican minister, or one of the Anglican ministers at St. John's Cathedral, the Anglican Church in Parramatta. So great to have you with us.
Good to be here.
Dave, tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure.
Introduce yourself.
So I'm not originally born in Australia. Come from the other side of the world, like actually many Australians originally did. My father is a very Englishman, very white upper middle class. My mother is from Austria in Central Europe, which caused some Austria confusion for a while with my friends down there. But actually now I think what's according to the current paradigms, that actually means that in terms of my ancestry and my personal culpability, I've just worked out I'm actually responsible for colonization of most of the world, and then actually starting 2 world wars. So yeah, that's my background.
That's a lot of white privilege.
That is a lot of white privilege. So I'll get my checkbook out, and if you just show me exactly who the check should go to, because there's apparently a big choice there, that'd be good. So grew up in the UK, studied in the UK and in the United States, where I actually became a Christian, despite growing up in the institutional church in England. Taught me to be removed from it to actually hear the gospel. It's actually not quite fair. I did hear it from a couple of people. Studied a bit in London as a chartered accountant, met my wife there, who's from Singapore, lived and worked a little bit in Singapore, and then came to Australia almost 17 years ago now. Yeah.
So you've got a broad perspective. I mean, you're married to somebody from another culture.
Yeah.
You yourself are living in another culture.
Yeah.
You've got a rich cultural background yourself. What's your perspective on the church in Australia and the particular challenges, I guess, it faces?
Sure. So my experience is primarily within the Anglican Church, and I take an interest in, there's no other word for it than the politics of the church, and a lot of the things that are going on globally are going on in the Anglican Church of Australia theologically. So that real push for theological liberalism, we have our own fight going on over, well, the presenting issue is matters of human sexuality, but obviously the underlying issue we understand very clearly is about authority in the church. Is the Bible actually the way by which God rules the church? So the Anglican Church of Australia is working through those issues like everywhere else. What that tells you, therefore, is that the same things will beset the church wherever you are in whatever culture. The New Testament, I remember in London, when I first started thinking about being a minister, the guy I was working with just saying, you ought never to be surprised by false teaching and division in the church. All you need to do is open up the New Testament and you will see very clearly that it exists. And so when you ask me that question, my answer therefore is to go, it's the same issues always, unbelief. They just manifest themselves slightly differently depending on the culture, whatever's going on at the time. And also the way things are worked out has a lot to do with like the constitution of the Anglican Church of Australia and so forth.
Yeah, just on that. Anglicans really pride themselves on the Anglican communion. There's some significant debates happening.
Yeah.
Is there the possibility that we'll see fracture?
Well, we already have, Mark. So we already have what I think has officially been called a tear in the fabric of the communion. So we pride ourselves on nice, fancy ways of describing things as well. But the reality is we already have a big breach in the Anglican communion. And really what it's caused by is not simply the false teaching, which always exists, but a failure of leadership to deal with that properly. So we've gone through all the structures, the primates, the heads of the national and transnational provinces have all met and made their decisions and made their statements and made their calls. And yet the Archbishop of Canterbury and successive Archbishops of Canterbury from various different theological persuasions, it has to be said, have all failed to implement the disciplinary procedures. And so the conservatives, the natural heirs of the theological inheritance, have said, well, we're just going to be biblical now, so we will not meet anymore with people who pursue false teaching.
So let's narrow this down. I see there's a general trend of a lack of discipline, church discipline.
Yes, of Western provinces, of Anglo-centric provinces, who have pursued to various degrees false teaching, and it's around the matter of sex, but it's more than that, and they've not been dealt with. And so the vast majority of the communion are Orthodox. And so 12 years ago, they had this big conference called the GAFCON, the Global Anglican Future Conference, gathered in Jerusalem, and leaders representing effectively 70% of the global communion came together and just said, "That's it, we're done."
Wow.
Now, what we've not said is we're leaving, because why would we leave? Why would we give up the house to the squatters?
Okay.
So what are they going to do? We're going to stay. We just won't meet with them. So let them have their big shindig if they want to. And the Archbishop of Canterbury has got what's called the Lambeth Conference coming. He already had to delay it 2 years because it was a bit of a disaster making it all happen. And now it's been delayed again for COVID. But a whole bunch of bishops will meet together. And they've done this every 10 years since the middle of the 19th century. But masses of them will now be missing because they're saying we are not going to meet with people who pursue or promote or now fail to deal with false teaching, which is an entirely biblical response. And the Archbishop of Canterbury could have sorted this out a long time ago by saying, well, I won't invite those people who have done that. But we're on this unity shtick, on this reconciliation shtick. And so they can all be...
So let's bring it down to Australia.
Sure.
What do you think is going to happen? Say the Sydney Diocese is probably the blue ribbon seat of Anglican community.
A bastion of conservatism, one might
That's
say.
Right.
But not
as
the only
such
place.
is a growing place for the gospel.
Yeah.
Do you think there could be a formal cutting of the tie with the rest of the communion within Australia?
Had it not been for COVID, we may very well have got close to that position already.
Wow.
Our General Synod, our National Parliament, was meant to have met last month, and I'm a delegate there. That's been delayed. Yes, we're close to seeing some form of division, I think, inevitably. A couple of dioceses have passed legislation that blesses being involved in a same-sex civil marriage.
Sure.
And it's just, I mean, aside from the fact the legislation itself is a mess, it's going through sort of a legal process in the in church at the moment. But also our General Synod was going to meet, and it was clearly going to be debated on the floor, and we were going to get some clear motions. My best prediction, and I'm on the record on this, and I think this is how it will go, and I'm happy for it to test it, is that the General Synod, when it meets next year, will re-establish a conservative position. It's not like we haven't done that before. The liberal dioceses and bishops are pushing in the face of just repeated assertions from the general bodies of Orthodox theology. We will reassert that as clearly as we can, and my suspicion is, as they've always done, the liberals will just want to do what they want to do anyway, and that's the point where we'll see the split, where again conservatives, Orthodox traditionalists, will just say, well, we're not meeting with you anymore, so any meeting that you're at, we're not going to be at anymore. And then what we do is we look at the chair, because it's the chair's job to put it together, who is, for us, it's the primate. The current guy is the Archbishop of Adelaide. The previous guy resigned. I mean, he put it nicely, but I think he just went, "Oh, I don't want this." And we'll look at him and we'll say, "Now, what are you going to decide to do? You have a choice now. Lead. I mean, all over the world, just going to say to leaders, lead."
Yeah, there'd be a lot of people watching us and this show, and not that are not Anglican. And they go, wow, it's very interesting, significant, agree that church discipline is one of the really healthy marks of a church. If we go more broadly and speaking more generally about Christian responsibility in the public square today, what are your thoughts there? Because you've been very active in this space.
Well, I've tried to be. I've been able to be on media when there's topics that they're quite controversial, and so the media loves the controversy, they love the debate, and to get someone who hopefully is a little bit erudite, a little bit articulate on the matters from a conservative position is to give most media credit, is quite engaging. They quite like to have someone to be able to, just not.
And they're not used to that, are they?
Well, they're not. So the first thing I really did on this topic was a live-in documentary series through SBS called "Living with the Enemy," where we had a gay couple come and live with us, and then I went to live with them and went to New Zealand for their wedding. I remember one of the producers coming to my house then, and we sat out on my deck drinking coffee like we are now, and he was just talking to me, and I was just articulating what I thought was a sensible, quite well understood position on marriage. Here's what marriage is. Here's what the boundaries are. If you want to change it. Well, he went, I've never heard this before in my life. And at that point I had to say, well, with the greatest respect, that's not because that opinion is not out there. It's because I think you're in a bubble where you're just not hearing
it's
that.
Interesting, isn't it?
And it is fascinating. And it lends into that wider thing, doesn't it? That actually you can only really say that you understand a topic and you are really engaging in it if you can accurately not just know, but describe your opponent's position. And so what's really interesting is as you go through these debates, and particularly over marriage, what is I've seen time and time again is the inability for the other side to you know, we went to New Zealand and we had this wedding, and the night before the wedding there was this sort of dinner thing, and one of the couple's dear friends was there, and it's actually an employer of one of them, and she was a well-respected person. She's got letters after her name that only Australia can give you, and she said to me, I just don't get why you're opposed to this. And unfortunately I had the presence of mind to say to her, and it was on camera, but they never show this stuff, right? I said to her, and that's the issue, isn't it? That you actually don't even get why. You're in it, and you see, you're an intelligent, articulate person. You do wonderful things in community. Well, clearly don't even want to. Because it's not hard. And I was finding this time and time again. And actually you get to the point, don't you, where you sit in the studios at the ABC and you do a little panel show, and then afterwards you talk to the journalists. And I walk away going, what is it about this topic that turns intelligent people into just imbeciles?
So is it the case then, David, that, you know, people need to be, who are Christian, who understand what the Bible is saying, need to be more confident in espousing their view, understanding that the people they're often talking to really have no idea where we're coming from?
Yeah, I think so. I think we need to be clear on what our view actually is. So one of the problems is I find myself in an awkward position because I'm not with the mainstream liberal, whatever, however you define that position. But actually, I actually want to say to the people on my right, I'm not sure that your position is quite where I want to be either. So you do these things in public and you get people from over here who are saying to you, I want to go, yeah, I'm not with you there either. So I don't think the response of, I just don't like it.
So
it's just not right.
Taking a side or a camp.
It's articulating the position, which is actually, we want to be really clear. And here's my, I mean, you have sound bites, right? Because you need to do them on sound. But here's my position. I'm with Jesus on this. So that my position is I'm with Jesus on this, because Jesus, when he's asked a question about marriage, and it is a question about divorce, but that is a question about marriage, he just goes, well, haven't you read? Like, he takes it as absolutely granted that the people who are asking him the question, who are experts in, this is Matthew 19, Mark 10, for those watching along, who are experts in the Old Testament, that they know what marriage is all about. And so I'm with him. That's my line.
It reminds me, I think it was Sam Chan, you know, evangelist here in Sydney, once said, the first person to define his terms in an argument normally wins the argument.
Yes.
And so we come into an argument, say, about marriage, and we think that the other side that we're talking to and disagreeing with has the same definition of marriage that we do, but they don't. They
don't. So actually what you need to do is, given that, and I think on this topic in particular, given that it's there's a prevailing view on what marriage is, although once you, well, we'll get there, question it, you can't do it. You've actually got to start to, you've actually got to start to attack it. You've got to be a bit of a provocateur, and you've got to start to undermine the premise. So one of the things I was regularly doing in the marriage debate, especially with the journalists afterwards, because often they can't, in public and on air, they can't give away the game, right? But afterwards, you've got a chance to chat to them. And one thing I was regularly doing, whatever show it was saying to them afterwards, what is marriage?
And what did they say?
Oh, well, it's when two people love each other. And so at that point, you just go, all right, take that for granted. All right, why two people? Now, I'm not advocating for incest or polyamory or whatever, but what I'm saying is, the position I'm holding to, it has boundaries. Every position has boundaries. Every institution has boundaries, right? Otherwise, it's meaningless. Of course, some people just hold there are no boundaries at all. So I had that with the gay couple, right? One of the gay guys on our kitchen bench having this debate, again, all on camera. And I said to him ultimately, so what is marriage? And he said, well, it's whatever I want it to be. In which case, I go to him, then it's nothing. Like, it's meaningless. It's Humpty Dumpty of work.
Just on that, you know, particularly with gay men, when we talk about marriage with our spouses, our wives, we're talking about exclusive fidelity, aren't we? But gay men they're not necessarily talking about that, are they? They're not excluding other partners.
They're not. But having said that, I think what we need to do is to engage with the very best argument that they've got. So yes, we can make arguments about promiscuity in the homosexual community.
Yeah.
And for example, these two guys, their notion of marriage was that actually they still maintain separate houses.
Oh, right.
I don't want to use the word home because I think one of their houses was kind of the home, but they still.
This is the couple that you were with on Sleeping with the Enemy.
Yeah, living with the enemy.
Living with the enemy.
That's right. Not the first one to make that mistake. And they used to say our marriage is just like your marriage, and I would go, well, one, you've said no, it's not because marriage is whatever, but two, it's not. It's clearly not. It's clearly something different. But
they lived in separate places
some of the time. And that's so it's just by which we just go, it's different. But our argument needs to be not why is there something dangerous about homosexual behavior. Our argument needs to be why does a faithful, monogamous, till death do us part homosexual relationship, why is that not marriage? That's what our argument has to be. And so now we have boundaries on marriage, and we go, it's one man and it's one woman. And even just setting Jesus aside for a moment, not that I want to, but just make the secular argument, it's one man, one woman, together for life. Why? Because that is a naturally, in the normal order of things, procreative couple. And so actually what we want to do is we want to recognize that relationship as something distinct from other relationships because it produces children.
So you want to present the positive side,
totally,
the ideal, and totally we should strive
but
for
also
that.
Say that's why we have boundaries to it. So that's why we want exclusivity.
Okay.
Always for the sake of the weaker partners.
Okay.
In the relationship. So for the sake of women and for the sake of the children. But that's why there's boundaries on it. Now, if you want to change the institution, what you're saying is that the boundaries are different.
Yeah.
So tell me what the boundaries are, because you're either inside it or you're not.
Okay.
So tell me what the boundaries are, and here's more importantly, why? Why those boundaries? Because why does marriage, as we understand it, have the boundaries it has? Because that's how children are produced, because fidelity is good for the kids and for the people inside it, because we want to protect it. But you then go back and they say, well, two people who love each other. So I say, all right, well, in my fantasy world where marriage is a man and a woman, that makes sense because it's a procreative relationship. But why in yours? Because you haven't mentioned procreation.
So, let me take it up a step.
Yeah.
We're coming from a traditional, classic Judeo-Christian worldview. Yeah. What are the philosophical assumptions or worldviews that are coming in that are antithetical to that?
Well, at the moment, there's always. I think first of all we need to say there's always antithetical worldviews. Sure. So Paul stands up in the Areopagus in Athens, Acts 17. And he sees idol statues to gods, and then an unknown god,
the unknown
God, just to cover all the bases, right?
Yeah.
So, and what you're actually seeing there is antithetical worldviews, right? To the truth.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking.
So so the Israelites in Egypt would have had antithetical worldviews around them as they marched into the Promised Land and lived in the Promised Land. There were antithetical worldviews all around them. There was the Baals and the Ashtoreths and the whole fertility cult of that. So that's all ways of looking at the world and thinking about how the world works, and that still exists today. I just last night did an evangelism course where we're presenting Jesus to people who are interested in looking, and I had a couple of participants who are Australian but from a different culture, and it was fascinating that they articulated their view of the world, and I went, that's Buddhism, isn't it? And they went, yeah, we're from a Buddhist family. They wouldn't call themselves Buddhists,
but they still had those assumptions
about what suffering is and what it does. So always exist. However, what we're seeing at the moment is this particular thing that some people are calling cultural Marxism. So I love your the title of the show.
Yeah, cultural Markisms.
But well done. But others are going, no, there's no such thing. But I actually want to go, no, this is a real thing, and it is antithetical. So let's deal with two things then. First of all, it is real. So to the people that go, there's no such thing as cultural Marxism. Yeah. Well, here's what I want to say.
Yeah, because there are a few, and notably Anglicans, I might add, that are saying there's no such thing. It's a right-wing conspiracy boogeyman theory.
Well, I'm sure there's some Presbyterians as well that say that. In fact, I know some. So let's call that a draw. So I want to go, well, if it's not cultural Marxism, I need you to tell me what it is. And I need you to tell me what it is, particularly given to very prescient observations. Number one, all the people running the show for these guys who are big and in the media and pushing things. And what are the two biggest examples today of this phenomenon? It's the Black Lives Movement.
Okay, Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter organization.
Yep.
As opposed to the wider movement. I understand there's a distinction.
Yep.
But also, what have we seen here in Australia? Probably the biggest example of the last few years is the Safe Schools movement, right?
Yeah, okay. I was at the center of that.
You were. You annoyed people with that one. Well done. So
I'm quite good at annoying people.
So all the people behind that are all self-professed Marxists. They're not hiding it. And they're actually saying, no, we're coming with this Marxist framework, which of course is not, and this is why we have these debates, it's not the Marxism of 150 years ago. It's not Karl Marx and Engels sitting down. It's that filtered through, well, first of all, filtered through the Russian Revolution, which made a whole bunch of people go, ooh, I'm not quite sure I want to wave that flag anymore. And then the Frankfurt School and all that kind of stuff.
So they haven't given up.
Well, they've not given up. They've repackaged themselves. So, of course, their Marxism today is not, it's not centered around so much the notions of capital that Marx is writing about in Das Kapital, but the underlying issue that's going on, which is the deconstruction, the repudiation of structures such as the family and capital and so on. That's inherent in their ideology.
Well, that's explicit in Black Lives Matter.
It's explicit in Black Lives Matter. It's explicit in the, I forget the name of the lady who was pushing all the Safe School stuff, but they're there. So and here's the thing. They may have shifted from Marx and his very, it was never just economic, because he talks about the family and all, and the bourgeoisie and all that stuff. But they've shifted from one flavor of it to another flavor. But interestingly enough, they are happy to call themselves Marxists, right? So that's the first thing, Mark. I'm going to keep going. Second thing is, look at what they're attacking. And what they're actually attacking is structures in our culture. Now, so that's what they're seeking to undermine deliberately. And again, look at their manifestos. And there's an overlap between the whole Black Lives Matters org and the Safe Schools philosophy. You can see the overlap as they go for the family and things like that. So now your question is, why is it normativity? So why is it antithetical? Well, here's what I want to say. It's because it deliberately seeks to attack by, I think the phrase they use is queering, which is not just the homosexual word, but that broader sense of attacking structures, bringing them down because they think they're dangerous and oppressive, the patriarchy and the family and so forth. It's attacking those things which actually the scripture tells us God has given us for the good of mankind. And so the scriptures are really, really clear, aren't they, that God has given a limited number of institutions for the good of mankind. So he's given us government. He's given us government for our benefit. So both Paul and Peter, Paul, Romans 13, Peter 1, Peter 2, both not only say that God has given government, but they say God has given government in order that good may be rewarded and evil punished. And it's a God-given institution, irrespective of whether the government gets everything right. It is in itself an institution that's there by God. And what's really interesting, if you don't mind me keep going, is that when Paul and Peter write, they both write, and Peter explicitly, Paul implicitly, write in scenarios of government oppression of one form and another of Christians. Nevertheless,
they still receive
Nero was probably on the throne.
They still receive obedience.
Submission to the authority, and affirmation of government in and of itself, irrespective of whether the government's getting everything right. But other things, even more fundamental things, marriage and family, given by God. So Jesus himself affirms, I mean, the binary nature of humanity as male and female who then get married is embedded into the creation narrative. Now, whether you take that literally or as myth, either way, it's clearly embedded in it. And you can't deny that. Jesus himself puts Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 right together and says it's God saying it, the whole thing. Family itself, what does Paul write when he, again, Paul says, as Luke is writing in Acts, he talks about God the Father, from whom all fatherhood descends, or some translations have from whom all family comes from. So it's God the pater, from whom all patria comes. So the notion of family in itself is linked in biblical thinking to having a father, but it's something inherent in God as father that makes you and I as fathers. It's an institution God has given, right? Now, what these cultural Marxists, or whatever else you want to call them, give me a better label, are doing is they're saying, no, those good things that God has given, as we would understand them, are actually bad. I mean, I do weddings as a minister. One of the things I do in the preface to the wedding service is I say, of marriage, this is given by God for the good order of society. Yeah. That's not a flippant statement. It's grounded in the scriptures. It's also grounded in social sciences. We know from our studies, don't we, that children do best when they're raised in a family where their biological mother and father are in a stable, committed relationship. And of course, when that's not happening, it is the most vulnerable in our society who suffer the most. I've ministered in about the most extreme examples of life in Sydney. I started my full-time ministry in Neutral Bay on the Lower North Shore, and my next position after that was rector of the parish of Glenquarry in Macquarie Fields, a suburb famous over 10 years ago for riots. About a year after I moved in, the Daily Telegraph here in Sydney ran an article on Mosman and Liverpool, Sydney's two most distinct suburbs. They're each one suburb away from the suburbs that I was ministering in. I say that because we've had this sexual revolution, this deconstruction of family and marriage and sex sweeping through Western society, run a lot by the intellectual liberals who come up with these great ideas and wouldn't it be great if we do this? They don't suffer the damage of it. So, if you say sex is just sex and it's for pleasure and it really doesn't matter about commitment and so forth, that is easy. It's easier to sustain. It still does damage, but it's easier to sustain when you're on $250,000 a year, sitting in your penthouse, sipping your Chardonnay, watching the Queen Mary sail into the harbour, right? But when you live out in the sticks, the same thing applied, right? There is no buffer. There's no wealth buffer for it. There's no middle class more self-restraint buffer for it, and we were just seeing family after family where fathers were not present because this deconstruction culture had taught them that basically they could have their way and there was no ultimate consequence to it.
Yeah, that's fascinating because Larry Elder, the African American scholar in the US, I think you could call him a scholar. He makes the point that the issue in America, and he's a Black American, he's saying it's not systemic racism, but it's systemic welfare.
Right.
And what he does, if you drill down on that, is the welfare system has created this crisis of fatherlessness.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Well, so I think his argument is that Johnson came along to those communities, Black communities, and said, we will look after mums where the father is not around, but only where father is not around.
Yes.
And
at that point, there was only like 25% or so of Black Americans without a father.
Yeah. So their argument is going to be, and so that gave an incentive for women, single parent families. And again, not that everyone's sitting there doing the maths going, well, if I have sex with a man but don't have him hang around, I'm going to get more money. It just made it, because most people just don't think at all, right? It just made it more possible, right? Yeah. Now, I guess that might be true. I don't know. I think I'd want to see more of it. I'm open to it. At least I'm open to exploring it. Yeah. What I think actually is more interesting is the notion that actually Black people in America are far freer and have far more possibilities and capabilities now than they did when Martin Luther King was marching.
Yeah. Yeah.
They clearly do.
Well, they've had a Black president.
They've had a Black
2 terms.
No one gets to say you can't make it if you're Black.
Yeah.
Right? You just don't get to do that.
Yeah.
And you know what? So it is actually about changing the mindset within the community itself. Now, I can't speak for Black America. I'm about I can't do it. Yeah. However, here's what I can tell you. When I was in Macquarie Fields, I taught scripture, the special religious education, in the public school in the center of the Housing Commission in Macquarie Fields, right? And when I arrived, it wasn't in the best place. And within a year of me arriving, they had appointed a new principal. I'm going to name him because the man is a hero. His name is Michael Strahan, right? And he came in there and I went in to see him. and said, hello, I'm a local Anglican minister. Just want to let you know, here's the charity we run. Here's what we've been doing. I reckon you've got the toughest gig in Macquarie Fields. So as you get to know me, please let me know if there's anything we can do. Well, I'd arrived in the Easter holiday, and he was there himself painting primary colours on the roof and the walls of the main office block. And then he just went around and painted, but he did more than just paint. He shifted the whole mindset of the school. He shifted the mindset of the teachers, and he made it possible for these kids to succeed where other people had given up on them or just thought they were not worth bothering. And then 2 years later, kids from that school won a national competition and went to Michigan. It was a competition where the kids had to design something for their local community or whatever it might be. They designed a welcome pack for kids coming into kindergarten in their school. And it was full of basics. So here's the thing about what it was. It wasn't pie in the sky. It was doable. It was just stuff that you and I, from our backgrounds, would take for granted.
Okay, so give me some examples.
Stationery, books, a couple of toys. I don't know the details of it, but it was easy to do. They put it together. It was a whole package, and it was like a way of how you onboard someone, to use that terrible phrase, is really, really important. You set, as people start things, you set a tone for it. And so they were able to set a tone from kindergarten upwards. And you know what this is like. I mean, you do it with churches as well. It takes a long time to feed through.
Sure.
It takes 6 years to change a primary school, right? Because the kids grow up, they swim in the culture.
Of course, they enter into community, they go all the way through to year 6.
Yeah, and so these kids got together, and I assume there's a bit of help from their teachers, but it was basically their idea, and they made it happen, and they got through the local thing, and the state thing, and then the national thing.
Wow.
And I just remember speaking to him on the phone. He was speechless after the national. I was like, what? Wow. He was like, I don't know, but it's just,
we won.
And we go to Michigan.
Wow.
And then they had to raise $20,000. And I was like, I'm in. And let's try and find you some other people from the Chamber of Commerce and stuff. I remember standing at the Chamber of Commerce trying to spruik for the charity I was chairing there at the time and going, but actually, if you got some cash, will you give it to these kids?
And so they ended up going.
Yeah, and so here's my point. It made a profound difference in that local community. Just an absolutely profound difference. And there was resistance at the start. And so forth. But actually, what it taught me is that communities can change. They're not locked in place. And that was a place of when I arrived, people said there were systemic generational issues. I mean, you know, you can't just go to someone in that community and say, you don't just go to young men and say, there's a job available for you if you want it. Because here's the problem. It's not a question of whether they want it. If they've spent their whole life watching their dad not bother getting out of bed until noon, because there was no point for him to get out of bed till noon, right? There is no modeling for them of what that looks like. Now, why is he doing that? Because maybe his dad did it as well. So it's systemic, right? And so you say to them, there's a job available for you. It's hard enough getting teenagers out of bed anyway, right? Right? But to say to someone, get up out of bed, 6 o'clock in the morning, put on your work clothes, go to work. It's not that, and here's the thing that I think some of our conservatives don't go right. It's not that they don't want to. It's that they don't know how. You might as well ask them to speak Swahili. Incapable of doing it. You spend the whole life breaking the pattern. You've got to do it. So the charity that I chaired coming out of the local church was actually called Break the Cycle.
Wow.
So I'm strapped on empowering sustainable life choices in communities.
Can you just briefly, because I want to talk to you about some other things too, but this is important. What were some of the specific strategies that you found worked in breaking the cycle?
I think the most small things and big things. Small things like a community pantry, but actually having our
meals,
having our workers walk around the pantry and say to someone, actually, you can cook rice, or take these vegetables. Like, simple as that, right? But actually just going, it's doable, and here's how you do it. And we did cooking classes. Right. So, but actually, I think the most profound thing that happened was we had a chaplain on site, another ordained Anglican man, and he was funded to do anti-recidivism, and he was working with men who at some point or even passed through a couple of times through the criminal justice system, and had a course called Sorted, 13 weeks. and working with these guys on why they were doing what they were doing.
Yeah.
And do you know what the most profound week of that whole course was?
Yeah, what's that?
It was when they talked about fatherhood.
Yeah.
And you would have grown, hardened men weeping because they actually suddenly realized they'd never had a father, even if their father had always been there.
Yeah.
And actually, and then that profound moment where you go, you cannot change the past, but you can decide today that your future is going to be different. And here's the thing that really got them: your children's future is going to be different. So no matter where you are in life, maybe you have screwed the whole thing up, and now you're not allowed to have contact with your kids. You can start again. And it was such an effective course and such an effective ministry that we would often go and stand at court, at magistrate's court, with people that had gone through the system. And I actually remember one profound one where I went in with someone, and it would take a lot for me to go in. I mean, I was a busy man and I wasn't going to waste my time on. But I remember one guy walked in, and the magistrate looked up, and the guy I was dealing with was actually in behind the perspex, right? And ranting and raving in his prison greens, and the magistrate, I think, was actually very lenient on him, frankly. But he looked and he saw me, and then you could see his face go, "Oh, finally a good one." You could actually see his face just go, "Finally a good one." And we had a public defender, legal aid at the court, and I reckon that legal aid solicitor didn't know what was going on. What just happened here? We had a guy who should have gone to jail, get a 6-month suspended sentence on the basis of the work that the charity and this ministry in particular had done. Wow. So what it showed you is that one life at a time, you can start to affect the communities. So that's my very long answer to your shorter question. I don't know about black communities, but I would, humans are humans. I would be surprised if it's not.
Well, I mean, I lived in Weewar for 7 years, and the school that my children went to was 50% Indigenous. Right. And one of the simple issues that they had was children coming to school who hadn't eaten. Yeah. And one of the most effective strategies was giving them breakfast. Breakfast, that's right. And providing them lunch so that they could be well fed, so that they could learn. And it's real, right? You've had that advert with that chocolate bar, right? Have you had your chocolate bar yet? And everyone settles down. But it's so true. Yeah. And I know with my kids as well, when they go, I don't have time for breakfast. Yeah, you do. Yeah. I will drive you in, but you have time for breakfast. And that's part of what a parent does. That's instills those. And actually, you'll have a proper breakfast. Yeah. Not Macca's. Yeah. Again, just think of people who are on welfare, sending their kids to, and again, I'm not having a go, but think of what's going on there where you think that is rational just because of the money, Mark. I know. Look, I remember walking down the street one day in Weewar, and a young mum, the baby was crying, and she got out the bottle and she unscrewed the cap and put a can of Coke in the bottle for the baby, and then the baby just, Can I change track? And it's not. And again, we want to be really clear. Not having a go at those people. Oh, no. I'm just saying, it's the community environment that almost doesn't, you just don't think any other way. Oh, absolutely. And so you've got to get in. So this is why it's like, it is education. And this book is a large reason why I want to talk to you is because we can rail against, cultural Marxism and all the rest of it, but that's not the issue. The issue is really, what do we do to try and help? Well, this sort of course would be a good example. Shamelessly saying, this is God's design for you as men. Yeah. That you would step up to target the men to step up. And there was an equivalent course going on with women, and particularly for women who had been in abusive relationships, and we call that empower. And that was a really valuable thing for these women to know they actually had worth. They've been so broken. Yeah, and they don't need to be ever treated that way by a man. And again, if you don't know any better, it's what you think. And here's the thing: if there's never been that man in your life, your father who treated you with respect, but because you're made by God, and one of the things about me made by God is that most women they want that man in their life. Yeah. You'll just find the first man who'll give you something, right? So James Dobson is right, isn't it, when he says raising girls? How do you raise girls best? You treat them so well that the first man that comes along and treats them badly, they just go, yeah, I don't need this. That's a good point. But if you've never had a good example of a role model, right? So just saying to men in particular, because it's the men that are the key under God,
here's God's design for your life. And if you stop for a moment, you'll actually realize
it's great.
That makes sense.
That's
It
really
does
good.
make sense. And it's actually, here's the thing, it's who you want to be.
Yeah.
Right. And the problem is culture today has sought to, the response has been to neuter men.
Yeah.
Right. So men are aggressive. And again, this is biblical, right? Men are aggressive, which is cursed behavior. But just because they're aggressive doesn't mean they ought not to use their strength. They just ought to use it in better ways. And so men properly being men is about using their power and strength.
Well, in the past, it occurs to me that that's what chivalry was.
Yes.
It was the using your strength in a self-controlled and honoring way.
Yes.
Or an honorable way.
Yes. I'll go on. So the answer, let's just follow this thing. The answer to abusive marriage is not to abolish marriage. It's to make marriage work properly, right? The problem with the cultural Marxists, the queerers, is that they think the answer to abusive marriage is marriage. Is the problem is marriage itself? It's not. The problem is it's the abuse of marriage. In the same way that because some people drink drive, the answer to drink driving is not to ban driving,
or to ban drinking,
even. Although there's an argument for that, but I don't hold to it. Do you know what I mean? It's to actually sort out the people that abuse driving. That's the answer. The structure itself is, well, driving is not God-given, it's just a thing, right? But marriage is God-given, right? And so that's the thing that we're dealing with, reclaiming. And of course, back to your original point, as Christians, we just need to have the guts to say, this is God's good plan for our world. And inevitably, coming back to your original question, that is drawing us into the conservative position.
But it is strange though, isn't it, David? They're wanting to attack the family. There's this attack on marriage. And yet, at the same time, there's been this enormous push for the right to be married.
Yes.
How do you explain that?
Yes. Well, here's my thing. So again, some in the movement don't want that. Some of them argue that having gay people being married is selling out to the whole thing. But see, what's taken over is the need for affirmation. Right. So we live in this society where we're desperate for affirmation. You must affirm me, right? And I am now the arbiter of all that is. Because if I remove external frames of reference, the only frame of reference I've got is me. So I'm now the arbiter. So it's about what I feel, not what I think. But actually, my ego, problem is I'm a sinner, right? So my ego needs constant massaging. So you must affirm me, and not offend me. I mean, I remember sitting on the drum opposite Mark Di Stefano and doing my I'm with Jesus. Here's what he says about marriage. And Mark Di Stefano, who I think he said he was raised by a homosexual couple, he said, well, my response to that, raised by two gay men, is, and I'm waiting for some great intellectual responses, I'm offended. Now, I wish I'd had the presence of mind to say, so what? Well, of course you're offended because it strikes to the heart of what's dear to you. You can't
say that, can you?
Well, no, you can't. But
because that is part of.
Well, I think you can. I actually think you can.
Story, though, isn't it? That there's victims and there's oppressors.
Well, which is why I think we actually have to. Because one of the reasons
call out that.
Well, I think you do, and I think one of the reasons why I've done some media stuff is so Christians can look at me, say no, and actually here I am, still smiling, still breathing, still, but we live in this world where we all want affirmation. And so what was gay marriage actually, and I argued this piece very strongly, what gay marriage actually was, it was the push for state-sanctioned endorsement and approval, right? Because the state went from, in marriage, they presented marriage and marriage certificates as state approval. Now, think about that. That's not what's going on, you see. When you get married, the government, doing its thing which God has told it to do, does two things. It rewards the good. So actually what it should do is give you some tax benefits and the rest of it. Now, in its great wisdom and benevolence, it's extended those benefits to other people. All right. Okay. What it also does is it punishes the bad. So if you decide you're going to walk out on your wife and children, it actually gives consequences to that. I mean, and if you don't believe it, try it, and you let me know how that goes as you're living in your little one-bedroom apartment while they stay in this house, right? So now, of course, that's been undermined by the lack of no-fault divorce. which has ruined that idea. It's always someone's fault, often both people, right? But they've turned that and the state protecting marriage and recognizing it into the state affirming the relationship, because that's what they want. They want it to be affirmed. And so the state now becomes the great affirmer of the relationship. And until they affirm same-sex relationships, it's no good.
Okay.
Now, that's not the state. I don't need the state. And here's the difference. I don't need the state to affirm my marriage. I actually don't care if the state thinks I'm married to my wife or not.
Yeah.
Right? I actually don't care if you think I'm married to my wife or not, because I'm married to her. But you see, here's the thing: those pushing for a change in the marriage law were actually saying, I care deeply. Now, it's phrased in terms of discrimination and stuff, but all those objections could be dealt with other structures.
Yeah,
in fact, most of them were swept away. Right? So it's not. It's ultimately about. It's almost narcissism, I want to say, that need to be affirmed, and we bought into it. And it's the need for my emotional response to someone else to be affirmed by a third party. Because why you get the love is love. Because the love is love thing is fascinating, right? Because one, it just makes no sense in terms of marriage, because you don't need to love someone to be married.
It's more a mantra than an argument.
It's a mantra more than an argument, right? And it's inconsistently applied. So can I marry my son now? Well, we both love each other. Why am I not like? If that's your mantra, why is it not love?
Can I marry, Lucy and Susie?
Lucy and Susie, and in fact the rest of the chess club as well, because we all want to be married. Like, where's the boundary? Because love is love, right? And it sounds flippant when you say it, but actually you need to keep saying it until penny drops. Some people go, yeah, it means nothing. But here's the thing: love has never been love in that sense, in the erotic, romantic love. That has never been a requirement for marriage. It's a very modern? Well, dare I say it, it's a Western imperialistic assertion upon it everywhere. I'm the pastor of a congregation at Parramatta, which is very reflective of now the local population, which means that almost half of my church congregation are from the Indian subcontinent. Huge numbers of them are in arranged marriages. Not all of them, but many of them are in not forced marriages, arranged marriages.
How's that working out?
Brilliantly, because they went in with the expectation that it wasn't going to be based upon the warm fluffies. That actually this is something that you need to work on. So I wrote a piece.
Do you find that they have fulfilling marriages though?
Yeah, certainly. Not perfect. And I know there's some where, like with every marriage, where I'm talking to husbands in particular about what they can do to make their wives feel loved. But yes, there are. It is a remarkable thing to sit with a couple who are perhaps old enough to even be your parents, at least your uncle and aunt, and to see them sit there to hold hands, or however you learn how to understand people's affections according to their culture, clearly deeply in love with one another, have worked hard to make a marriage work, have produced children together, are in love. So I wrote a piece a couple of years ago where I referenced that brilliant song in Fiddler on the Roof, where Tevye turns to Golda and he says, "Do you love me?" Right? And she goes, "What do you mean, do I love you?" It's an embarrassing question for her. But she basically goes, "I've washed your underpants, I've cooked your clothes, I've raised your children, I've shared a bed with you." Yeah, well, if those things mean love, they do. Now, actually, behind it, of course, as the song goes on, you can actually see that here is a man who's actually learned to gently woo his wife. And it may have taken him 25 years of her darning his socks and laying down in a bed with him, but he's learned to woo his wife, and she actually loves him. And they had to work on it. But if you'd said to them, let alone the happily married couples in my congregation, you must be in love to get married, they would laugh at you. World just doesn't work that way. And again, as I say that, there'll be some people saying, "Oh, well, you're saying you should live in a loveless marriage." I'm saying no. Love, the real love that sustains a marriage, that keeps it going, is far deeper and far more profound than the fluffies. Whenever I prepare couples for marriage,
on that, another very famous Sydney Anglican, Philip Jensen, said many years ago in some very famous talks at New South Wales Uni, where he was the chaplain. The talks were called "Love, Sex, and Marriage." Yes,
there's a book, isn't there? He wrote as well.
Yeah, that's right. And he said that it's significant that in the Christian marriage ceremony, our vows are not "I do," but "I will."
Yes.
Will you reflect on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why is that so significant?
Because you're making a commitment in front of witnesses. It's what I said to you before. It's a contract. It's a very public contract, which is one of the reasons why the whole COVID restrictions upon marriages is so, it's been so hard. And I think one of the things that people have missed is, one of the reasons you gather a big crowd together for a wedding is not just to celebrate with them, but actually because you're making the promises that you make, not just in front of God, but in front of a crowd of witnesses.
Yeah.
Whose job there is, it's like a baptism, right? On which we finally agree with something as Presbyterians and Anglicans, whose job is not least to support you and hold you accountable to the promises that you made.
Yeah.
So, so if a couple where I've married, they come back to me in years to come and things are difficult, and the husband says, I can't be bothered anymore, one of the things I have to say to him is, then we have a problem. Because you made promises, and we discussed those promises, and we discussed
and you said them publicly.
And you said them publicly. On my wedding band, I have Hosea 3:1b written, inscribed on the inside, just the reference, and it's God's word to Hosea. So Hosea is a brilliant little prophetic book in the Old Testament, and it's at a time when the people of Israel are basically being adulterous towards God. God is, if you like, is their husband, and they are whoring after any other god other than the true God himself. And so God says to Hosea, see that woman over there, Gomer? Hosea says yes. Says, take Gomer as your wife. And Hosea goes, that's Gomer. Gomer has a number of male friends who are regular visitors. Friends, that's right. And so God goes, no, take her. And so he takes Gomer, he marries her, but Gomer by name, Gomer by nature, still maintains a number of male. It's unfaithful to her husband, right? And actually bears these children, who very interestingly, God says to Hosea, you are now going to adopt as your own, which the Bible later on uses as a model of God bringing in Gentiles into the kingdom in Romans. But then in chapter 3, he says, go back to your wife of unfaithfulness. And then Hosea 3:1 says, love your wife as the Lord loves the Israelites. It's a profound statement, which is like a husband who has an adulterous wife, who he will take back, who he will love unconditionally. And of course, this is the model of big. And this is Jesus, right? When he comes and dies on the cross, that's him taking his adulterous wife and saying, I still love you. I will still have you. I will do everything to maintain this relationship. So I've got that inscribed on my wedding band for the day when it's not arrived yet.
I've got to say, I mean, that is such an inspiring ideal, but there'd be a lot of people listening to this going, well, are you then saying I just do excuse the infidelity of my spouse?
No, not at all. But actually, no, we should never excuse infidelity. But do you know what? If you actually understand the forgiveness that Jesus brings, it actually empowers you to forgive. Now, of course, it takes two people to come together and restore a relationship. But here's the thing I've learned in pastoral ministry. I have never seen a marriage that cannot be rescued. And I've seen some quite remarkable rescues of marriages because of the gospel. And really interesting, actually, the most effective marriage rescuing ministry I've seen is ministers sitting down with husbands and just reading the Bible with them and just saying, let's get acquainted with Jesus, right? I have seen people who don't want to rescue their marriage. At that point, there's nothing you can do. But I've never seen a marriage that can't be rescued, because actually
the two parties are wanting it.
Of course. And of course, forgiveness, you can have an attitude of forgiveness to someone, but until they themselves are ready to repent and recognize the wrong that they've done. But you see what the gospel does, the gospel gives me the capacity in a world of conflict to respond appropriately to that. So I remember, I'm not a perfect man, and I can remember doing some utterly idiotic things in the past. I can remember one person I offended deeply. It's a stupid thing I did, and I went round. It was a lady, and I went round to their house afterwards with a bunch of flowers. And this was a long time ago in Sydney. There's two women other than my wife I've taken flowers to in that way. But I remember this lady in particular. The first one was a Christian, and she was so gracious to me when I arrived. The second one, I went to this lady's house, and I just had this bunch of flowers, and I said, I'm sorry, it was a dumb thing. I'm really, really sorry. This is a small token. What was really interesting about it is, well, at the time, she did not know what to do with that. She had no framework for accepting the apology. It was a fascinating moment, right? And I walked away actually almost at that moment sadder than I'd been going to the door, Now, since then, we've met on a number of occasions and everything's good. But that was a fascinating insight to me. What the gospel does, the good news of what Jesus has done for me, is it makes it possible for me then to have the impetus to say sorry, right? But also, but also to forgive. Now, why can I say sorry properly? It's because actually I don't fear what may come.
Yeah.
And I don't fear this retribution. And actually my justification, it comes back to some of the other things.
Because when you're talking about the gospel, you're talking about Jesus rescuing us, like Paul says, from the coming wrath.
That's right. And so actually what that means is, and this has profound implications in everything that Christians do, it actually means in this world that is increasingly screaming for affirmation and driven by it, I don't need it. So again, and this is what the church desperately needs to get, right? When the Black Lives Matters crowds shout at us and say, you must be a racist. I had this happen to me on Twitter too. I couldn't believe it. I had the words white privilege and white fragility, that's a new one on me, but I boned up on that quickly, thrown at me simply because I said, I really want to be able to say something deep and real about what happened to George Floyd. But at the same time, I find the Black Lives Matter hashtag difficult because of these things. And here was interesting. Christian pastors in the States calling me all sorts of names, saying, oh, that's a racist move. So, well, you're calling me a racist? Well, no, I'm not. I'm saying it's a racist move. Well, mate, listen, come on. You and I both know from the heart comes everything that we do. So let's not pretend there's a distinction there. But what's really interesting is, why are some of them doing it? I think because they just need to be liked, need to be affirmed by the world. But actually, what does the doctrine of justification by faith teach me? That I am right in the eyes of God. Now that doesn't teach me arrogance, of course, but what it does mean is
profound humility.
Well, I think
because you don't deserve it. But we don't deserve it. We're sinful.
Yeah.
Jesus' blood has forgiven us.
Yeah. But also
brought us a right standing with God.
But also when the crowd screams, I don't need to go with them. I mean, it's like, who's one of the great...
So then it gives you courage as well.
Yeah, like, and it has been giving Christians courage all through history. So it was some of the great... Polycarp, right? Stands in Polycarp's brilliant, right? So Bishop of Smyrna at the end of the 1st century, one of the very earliest Christians, you know the story, you're grinning already because you know it, but full of profoundly brave moments. Polycarp, who's leading the church, and it is a time of intense persecution. And the Christians, interesting enough, are being called the atheists. Because they won't believe in the Roman gods. Now, I take it to you, Polycarp's story is really helpful for us today because we are being called the atheists today. We are being told we will not bow down to the gods of the current culture, right? Polycarp is persuaded by the church initially he's an old man, persuaded to go and hide. He does that for a bit, but finally found. And when his captors come, invites them in for dinner, feeds them because they've got a long journey ahead, and then goes with them the next morning. But is in the arena in front of the proconsul, and says, well, it's great. So the proconsul says, "You're an old man. Come on, you don't need this. Just denounce the atheists." And Polycarp, with the arena in front of him, says, "Down with the atheists!" He's going down, but you see. What the proconsul says to him is deny Christ. And Polycarp says to him, for 84 years, he has done me no harm. Why would I deny him now?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Right? So he's both that profound sense, but also the courage at the moment to speak up and say, this is all idolatry. This is all unbelief in the one and true God. It's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego before Nebuchadnezzar, right? They're about to be thrown into the fire. And they say, we believe God can save us from the fire. But even if he does not, O great King, we cannot bow the knee. Right? Now, of course, well-meaning Christians will say, we're not bowing the knee. Upon which point I want to go, and there certainly is, we want to be compassionate, we want to be speaking up, all those different things, but there comes a point where I just want to go, but I actually think there comes a point where we are frightened.
So is it that the Christian church today, and let's just talk about our own context here in Australia, and in particular in Sydney, are we afraid of suffering? Are we afraid, are we reticent to be persecuted in a way that our forebearers were not?
Look, I don't know about the forebearers, but certainly I think we are all acutely aware of the death of 1,000 cuts of what people say around us. And look, you and we are pretty protected in our positions, right?
We are.
Now, I think you and I are probably you and I both know that there may come a day when things come for us. So, for example, where if the state says you cannot say that homosexual marriage is not a proper marriage, well, you and I both know what we will be preaching that Sunday and in our Sunday schools. We're going to stand up and we're going to say, I'm with Jesus. However, I'm prepared to do it. But actually, it's our congregation members who day after day are in their workplaces where there are the rainbow banners. No other thing gets all the banners up. I remember during the marriage debate, one of the guys at church, he worked in a very big public sector organization, right? And he said to me, all the banners went up over the weekend, all the posters with the rainbow and this is a safe space and the rest of it immediately prior to the debate. We never had a debate about marriage. No, and I said to him,
non-binding voluntary postal
yes, with no debate. There was no proper debate. No. And I said to him, do you feel safe? He went, hell no. I don't feel safe anymore.
Who's saying this?
My church member. Who just, because he holds such a traditional position, he actually, here's the thing, he held the official position by law of Australia.
And felt unsafe.
If you don't think there's something going on, go to the university campuses around that time. Got two tables next to each other, one promoting same-sex marriage, the other promoting the traditional, let's call it, position of marriage. Which one by the end of the day would be a wreck with people punched and spat on and assets
and
destroyed.
No repercussions.
So people fear it, they feel it, and it is that real oppressive cultural shift that silences people. And so what I have done with my people regularly, and especially with our younger people, where it's swimming all around them, right? I said to them, you need to know what your answer is going to be, because they will ask you. You don't have to go looking for the conversation. Some of you may want to do it. You probably shouldn't. But you need to have the answer ready to go. And the answer is, I'm with Jesus on this. Right? Because it's hard to argue against Jesus, although they'll go for him. But you need to be ready to go. And here's the thing as well, you need to be ready for no one to like you.
That's good.
So you actually need to have your doctrine of justification really lock solid.
Well, it's not good, it's scary. And I totally agree with you. Look, fascinating to talk to you about this. If there was one thing you could say to people, as a pastor, as somebody that's involved in the public square, what would be the one word of advice you would give them in terms of being a Christian in the current context?
Your Lord and Savior has been your Lord and Savior for 480 years. He has done you no harm. Quite the opposite. So away with the atheists. Or Jesus himself says it, don't fear him.
Who can kill the body and after that can do no more.
Right. Fear the one who can throw you into hell.
Now,
of course, the flip side of that is, what can they do to you? We're working through 1 Peter at the moment at our lunchtime talks every Wednesday at St. John's in Parramatta. And 1 Peter is brilliant for people in the workplace because it speaks into this thing. I mean, Peter says, who is going to harm you if you are eager to do good? In 1 Peter, the doing good is the speaking of the gospel. And Peter, of course, urges proper submission and don't be a pain. What good is it to you if you're beaten for being a jackass? Right? I'm paraphrasing again, right? But also he says, to this you were called. So actually I want to go, let's just be real. Paul to Timothy, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. But what do we hold on to? It is the resurrection. Right? So why can Polycarp face death? Because he knows death is not the end. He knows there's something far, far better. Peter says at the end of his letter, you have suffered for a little while now, and then glory. And the suffering for a little while, he's not ignorant of what that actually looks like for them. But compared to the glory that is to come, right? And so actually it's be really clear on who Jesus is, be clear on how good he is, be clear on the resurrection. That's why when church leaders stand up and say it doesn't matter if the resurrection is physical or not, it's just an idea, I want to go, no! It makes all the difference. Peter, praise be the God and Father, Lord Jesus Christ, who's given us a new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. That is the Christian hope. It is not. This is why I've got to say, and probably disagree with some of the people watching, this is why the prosperity gospel and the kind of God will make you rich now stuff is so dangerous, because it so undermines us, because it feeds into the fact that we want to have everything go well now. No, I have something far greater that's been won for me. It is my forgiveness, which means the past is dealt with,
just to
and my future. Sorry, I'm preaching. I'm a preacher, man.
Yeah, no. It's like my own kids say to me this.
Yes.
Oh, Dad, we asked you a question with that sermon.
That's right.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think what you're saying is right. And thank you. I appreciate coming in twice.
Well,
we actually did this before.
We did. That one was really good.
Oh, yeah, that was great. But thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. Take care.
Terrific. So next time on cultural Markisms, we hope to continue talking about the conversation. In particular, what's happening in our culture? What are the particular challenges for Christians, and not just those that are Christians, but those that hold to a conservative worldview? What are the particular challenges that are happening in our society? Thanks for being with us. Hope you've enjoyed this episode, and look forward to seeing you again next time on Cultural Markisms.
Cultural Markisms is a production of The Good Source, hosted by Mark Powell. To watch, listen to, or read more content without the SJW PC fact filter, visit goodsource.news. That's good, SAUCE.news. Become a Good Source supporter for exclusive access to live and unedited interview recordings, including the conversations before and after the show.